Good afternoon. My name is Gregory Diamond from the Center for Global Justice, Centro para la Justicia Global, and welcome to our first Monday talk of uh, 2025. And we are so pleased to have Jeff Faux, who has spoken many times for the center. And he's going to be speaking today on Democrats gave away America's future to Trump. Can they get it back? Uh, Jeff Faux founded the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., the leading think tank focusing on working Americans, and was its president for 20 years. He wrote The Servant Economy, The Global Class War, and 5 other books. He has lectured widely in the US, Mexico, and abroad. Among other experiences, he worked in the federal government's war on poverty and for the State Department on nuclear disarmament issues. Uh, he has been finance company manager, a merchant seaman, a bartender, and a blueberry farmer, and a member of 5 different labor unions. You can see articles of his on jefffo.com. So here's Jeff. Take it away, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Gregory. It's nice to be here again. So here we are, a week before the inauguration of a reckless, megalomaniac, fully transparent fascist. And in this sort of week, maybe we have for reflection before it all hits the fan. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got here. There's 100 different scenarios about what's going to happen in the future. Is Trump going to invade Greenland? Is he going to abolish Social Security, deport 2 million people, tear up the Bill of Rights, and rename the Gulf of Mexico? Quien sabe? Who knows? He's an unstable personality. So he's therefore unpredictable. There's only a couple of certainties, I think, and that is he and his crowd is incapable of dealing with the multiple crises that the country faces. Inequality, a hollowed out economy, a crumbling healthcare system and education system. Los Angeles is on fire. The AT technology is out of control. Forget it. And so far, he says he's committed essentially to making it all much worse by destroying the government's capacity to act. So, as the old saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, start and ask how you got where you are. So I'm going to focus not on Trump so much, although indirectly, but the only alternative in our two-party system, and that is the Democrats, like it or not. And it turns out that over the past decades, the Democrats have been there enabling the course of history that's led to Trump's goose-stepping his way to the presidency. Now, what's interesting today, I think, is after losing 2 of 3 elections to a preposterous candidate, the Democratic leadership tells us that it's not their fault. There's a cacophony of finger pointing and blame. Happens after every election, of course. Here they're blaming the left for alienating voters for the phrase defunding the police or getting excited about transgender bathrooms, protesting Gaza. Well, they say, yes, we've made mistakes. Biden should have stepped down. If Harris had spent more time in Milwaukee, or Detroit or Pittsburgh. And always they complain about not having enough money. Although it's interesting for a moment to ponder that Kamala Harris spent more money on the campaign than Trump did. Joe Biden spent more money on his campaign than Trump did. Hillary Clinton spent more money on her campaign than Trump did. So there's something else going on here. The chairman of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, says, well, actually, this is a victory. A victory? He says, the historic pendulums swing back and forth in American politics, and now it's swinging to the right. It's all over the world, in fact. So it's a victory because it could have been a landslide. Anyway, the implicit conclusion is that the pendulum will flow back. Democrats could win the House of Representatives and the Senate in two years, win the White House back again in 4 years. It sort of reminds me of the story of after World War I, French general was asked, well, how do you beat the Germans? And he said, well, you retreat, and you retreat, and you retreat, and you wait for the German mistake. So, of course, Trump is no smarter than the Kaiser was, and will probably make a lot of mistakes. So the conclusion of the people who run the Democratic Party seem to be retreat, retreat, and wait for Trump's mistake. Of course, they say we're going to resist. Well, take this episode that just occurred. In any serious fight, political fight against Donald Trump, the House of Representatives Oversight Committee is an essential bastion, essential battle station, and it needs to be run by an energetic Democrat, aggressive Democrat. But like Biden, the rest of the old guard is not going to go away easy. The 85-year-old Nancy Pelosi, now I'm older than Nancy Pelosi, 84-year-old Nancy Pelosi, muscled out the 35-year-old dynamic Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the ranking member on that committee in favor of her 74-year-old sick friend. The Democrats at the moment are no match for Trump. Now, the problem with this pendulum theory, there are two problems. One is Trump is not just a version of another version of extreme Republican conservatism. Nixon, Reagan, the Bushes, they all accepted constitutional limits on their power. Trump is aiming at smashing those constitutional limits. As he says, well, there may not be any need for future elections. Now, the second problem is the 800-pound gorilla that's sitting on the Democratic table confronting them. And that is the shift in the working class voters to the Republican Party, which is essentially what gave us Trump. It's got a long history. Began with the split decades ago over Vietnam, the defeat of George McGovern in 1972. And when the Democrats came back from those years, they adopted Ronald Reagan's anti-government strategy, his ideology, in order to raise more money from big business. Now, Democrats always took money from big business, but the influence of business was balanced by the influence of labor. Starting with Carter, actually, Clinton, and then Obama, they systematically turned their back on working class voters. Carter deregulated business, privatized government. Clinton told us the era of big government is over. And pushed by Wall Street, he opened up the US to unregulated free trade. So corporations could manufacture in countries where they could pay labor as cheaply as possible. The result was a devastated US industrial base, workers and communities in the Midwest especially. They were the backbone of support for the Democratic Party. They were called the firewall for the Democrats. And they were then devastated. The industrial base was vastly crippled in the Midwest. Now, since the New Deal, there was a social contract, in effect, between the Democrats and the white working class. And it went like this. Democrats said, you tolerate racial integration, and we promise jobs and economic security. Now, there was plenty of white resistance in those days, especially in the South. But in most of the rest of the country, the working class stuck with the Democrats, even though there was a lot of racism and resistance and resentment about civil rights. In 1965, I marched with Martin Luther King in the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. I saw placards from groups from the auto workers, from the steel workers, from the machinists, from the textile workers, from the AFL-CIO. I never saw a placard from the people from Goldman Sachs or Citibank or General Electric or the Chamber of Commerce. And when the Democrats tore up that social contract, that's when the Republicans moved in with appeals to racism, misogyny, and cultural intolerance. Not to worry, said the New Democrats, not to worry. The working class, just a bunch of old white racist guys, too stupid to know their own interests. Anyway, they're a shrinking part of the electorate. The new Democratic coalition of the future was going to be minorities, women, educated people in the suburbs who cared about abortion and identity and making sure there were enough immigrants to mow their lawns. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, said at the time, for every vote that we lose in Pittsburgh, we're going to get 2 votes in suburban Philadelphia. So a little bit later, when the Obama administration bailed out General Motors, the automobile workers had to take big cuts in wages and benefits. And they wanted in the contract, in the deal, assurances that when GM became profitable, they would get their wages back, the things that they had conceded. When this got back to Obama's chief of staff, who was overseeing the negotiations, his response was, fuck the auto workers. That's some of that history. Now, there's another connected point here that has occurred to me recently. When the Democrats sold their soul to big business, they also adopted corporate marketing strategies. Now, if you're a corporation and you're selling dog food or soap or whatever, you divide your customers into the smallest segments you can so you can target those people with advertising. So typically, you divide your customer base into white, Eastern, suburban women between the ages of 25 and 40, or Latino families in San Jose, between the ages of 40 and 50, whatever. Now, it works selling soap. and it works selling dog food. But in politics, you want to divide the enemy into different constituencies, and you want to unite your allies into one. Yet today's marketing, political marketing, divides voters into smaller and smaller and smaller segments so that they can be appealed to with programs that just fit what the political consultants think are their problems. Now, one of the results of this is Democrats come off with seeming to care more about special interests, small groups, than the country as a whole. Which gets to a point here. The United States is a big country. It has big problems. You can't solve this just with the private sector. You can't solve it by people buying guns and holding up in Wyoming. It's going to take big, competent government to solve these big, difficult problems. The greatest era of progress in American history, in the last 100 years, certainly, was the New Deal and then the Great Society. Both were messages of equality for everyone. Yes, it's true. The Great Society was about liberating the intolerance against African Americans, but it was also about Medicare for all older people. And when the Democrats started sounding like Republicans, dissing government, there was no one to explain how things worked in America. My favorite story is the story of the woman in the supermarket who came up to her Democratic senator who was campaigning. And she said, the one thing I want you to do is keep the government's hands off Social Security. Keep the government's hands off Social Security. Now, that's kind of a joke, right? You would laugh at her. But the Democratic senator promised that he would. So when the Democrats jumped into the pockets of big money, they became afraid to come up with big solutions that required big government and that rose to the level of the problem. Healthcare is an example. Since 1947, Americans have responded in polls positively to the question of, should the government provide affordable health care to every American? Since 1947, almost 80 years ago. Now, Medicare in the Great Society was a big step towards it. And that was the last really big step. And almost 80 years later, Americans are dying today because they can't afford a doctor. Now, into this vacuum comes Donald Trump. Democrats won't help you. He says, I will. So in 2016, he beat Hillary Clinton in the Midwestern states on the issue of his issue of ending free trade, and I'm going to bring you better health care. Well, he never delivered. So he lost in 2020. And after January 6th of that January, the next January, we all thought he was finished. Insurrection, another name for insurrection is treason. But Biden didn't deliver either. 4 or 5 years ago, young progressives in the party started promoting that the Democrats support a wide, comprehensive program they called the Green New Deal. And that was something that rose to the level of the economic and environmental problems that this country faces. The Democratic leaders just rejected this as too radical. It would scare away the big money. Now, to his credit, Biden stepped in that direction for a couple of years, and then he stopped, devoting all his attention to war in the Ukraine, Gaza, challenging China over Taiwan. That was Lyndon Johnson's mistake, and you would think that the Democrats would have learned from that. Instead of pursuing his war on poverty and his great society, Lyndon Johnson pursued a war in Vietnam against Asian peasants. And in the end, he lost both wars. Now, after this election, this last November, it's clear that the new Democratic strategy, this idea that you didn't need the working class, was a complete failure. Trump, obviously, he won back every battleground state with the support of the working class. Turns out that the working class is not just a bunch of old racist white guys, as the caricature would have it. It's a majority of people of all colors in America. Trump won 57% of their vote. Democrats told us abortion was going to bring out the women, right? And that was going to overwhelm Trump. Well, how'd that work out? Harris got 55% of the women's vote. 4 years before, Joe Biden had gotten 55% of the women's vote. The exit polls showed that the biggest issues facing, at least what Americans thought were the biggest issues facing them, were rising prices and immigration. Women were furious at rising prices in the grocery store. And when Harris started talking about, well, maybe the problem is price gouging, her chief economic advisor, a Wall Street billionaire, said essentially, shut up. This turns off all of our friends and our donors in Wall Street. So Harris had no explanation for why prices were rising. And if you're just the average voter, not, you're not a policy wonk or an economist, if you're just the average voter, you're sitting there saying, well, if she doesn't understand why prices are rising, how is she ever going to fix it? Now, Trump comes along, blustering Trump. The problem is big government, he says. The problems are the immigrants. The problem, it's absurd. But in this era of social media and all that, an absurd explanation is better than no explanation. And she had no explanation for why prices were rising. The other issue that was the number two issue for voters was immigration, illegal immigration. Now, Trump's vile language about immigrants, I mean, rapers and robbers and all that stuff, was supposed to bring out the Hispanic American vote for Harris. Trump got 42% of the Hispanic American vote, 8 points over where he was 4 years before. Now, how could that possibly be, you ask? Well, instead of listening to people who purport to speak for that community, listen to what they say. Quote, I'm quoting one, I came to this country legally. It took me years to get residence and citizenship. These people, this is a Mexican-American talking, these people just crossed the border. Democrats provide lawyers and health care, and judges let them come back when their case comes up in 2 years. Meanwhile, they're going to compete with my job. Now, Trump's answer to immigration was build a wall, deport people. Not a nice thing, but clear, right? The average voter can see a wall Can see people getting on the bus and going back to Mexico, etc. Now, the Democratic answer was, well, we have just sat down with some Republicans and we've negotiated a bipartisan legislative proposal. Now, it's hundreds of pages long and complicated, and you probably can't understand it. But, you know, there's going to be more lawyers and more childcare and more judges and more guards and more electronics. And we're really proud that some Republicans support it. Now, you're the average voter who Democrats have encouraged to see government as useless, bloated, expensive, and ineffective. What do they think of Trump's wall and buses versus Harris's stack of legislation when they've been told all these years that government can't do anything? No contest. Well, you might say that's not fair. Immigration is a hard problem. No? Yes. But immigration problem didn't start at the border. People don't just leave home, you know, because they feel like it. They leave home because, in the case of most of these people, because of violence and poverty. Now you got to ask yourself, if you're serious about solving this problem, why are they coming? Why is there violence and poverty? Well, violence and poverty in these places has been caused over the years by the oligarchs and military juntas that the United States has supported. You know what the deal has been. They send us drugs and people, we send them guns. So under Democrats and Republicans, this country is spending hundreds of billions of dollars intervening in other people's neighborhoods around the world. 750 bases, military bases around the world in places most of us have never heard of and can't pronounce. But when Lopez Obrador, whether you like him or not, asked for help with economic development to create jobs in southern Mexico and Central America, Washington gave him the finger. So here we are. Don't know where we're going. We know a little bit about where we came from. Now, James Baldwin, the great American writer, once said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not faced. And I can tell you, facing this new reality and trying to figure out this business with Trump is not easy, especially for someone like myself, who's been a progressive Democrat all their life, to try to honestly think about Trump's appeal. I can tell you makes me uncomfortable. And that was Baldwin's point. It's going to make you uncomfortable. So let's start with something really, really distasteful. Take the phrase, "Make America Great Again," MAGA, and its associated phrase, "America First." For me, what comes up, and for I'm sure many in the audience, is 1930s fascist anti-Semitism in America, as well as the 1950s McCarthy xenophobia. It's America. What comes up is America at its ugliest. But I'm wondering today that for many younger Americans, it might sound different. For example, the previous generation could afford to buy a house, raise a family on one person's income, go to college without drowning in debt. Wasn't that great? So someone in their 30s might ask, so what's the problem with making America great like that again? Hillary's retort was, America is great. Well, I'm sure for Bill and Hillary it is, but for many, it's not. And don't people expect that a US president elected by Americans who's going to put America first? Who else? France? India? Brazil? Israel? Saudi Arabia? And most Americans are not isolationists. But like almost everyone around the world, they believe that they live in a geographically defined community. And the people they elect, if they have a democracy, ought to put them first. Well, if Democrats can stop Trump, if they can once again be instruments of social progress, they need to build totally new narratives. And they've got to start by facing reality and telling the truth. Here's 4 places to start, seems to me. Admit America is an empire in decline. Now, there's a long discussion we can have about why America is still got a huge amount of economic influence in the world. Declining, but it's still an amount. It's got to do with the dollar and all of that. But at any rate, it's in decline. And yet we still have a country rich in resources, rich in people, smart, technologically advanced. But we no longer have the political and economic capital to support 750 bases aggressively fighting in places most Americans never heard of. And where, to tell another piece of the truth, we usually bring grief and chaos. So that's, I think, one place to start. Common sense, in my view, is that we should pull out of most of these places. At least, yeah, pull maybe all of them, and concentrate in a way that Lyndon Johnson failed and Biden failed. Concentrate on building up this country and the surrounding neighborhood. Biden in the last 2 years spent practically 100% of his political capital in getting Congress to put more money into the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, and to sending warships and et cetera to challenge China in Taiwan. And that China is interesting. It was the Democrats who forced the kind of trade deals that made China a technological giant eventually. So we did it, and we did it eyes open. Bill Clinton and the Democrats did it eyes open. And now, 40, 50 years later, we're talking about maybe war with China because they've gotten too strong. We don't care about the people in Taiwan. What we care about now is, we don't want China to get their technology. Well, this was fated once we started down the road to making China with the help of Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, et cetera, making them the powerhouse that they are. So I think we should concentrate on our own neighborhood. Second, I think the Democrats need to reassert the importance of the public sector, the government as an essential instrument for solving the big problems. You cannot do it otherwise. We've had 45, 50 years of claiming that, just leave it to the market. Jimmy Carter, who in many ways he was more admirable after he left the White House, I think. But, when he was in the White House, he said, the government can't do this and the government can't do that. And the private sector has got to do it. When he was faced with inflation, it was hands off. let the market take care of it. Well, the market took care of it and elected Ronald Reagan. So third thing is, I think there needs to be a practice of class inclusion. The language of bringing Americans together, not targeting smaller and smaller special interest groups. And that was the language that was successful in the New Deal. And while it lasted, successful in the Great Society. And the only possibility, and again, I hate to say this, but it's true that you could listen to Trump and come away with, from my point of view, that this SOB is trying to divide the country. And you can listen to him in a different way that says he's trying to unite the country. Now, that's a hard thing for someone like me to even think about. But as James Baldwin said, things that can't be faced can't be changed. Now, there's another possibility. Well, so you got to face the fact, I think, that the Democratic Party is broken and corrupt. And if we're going to do something about our future, that party, which is really, I think, the only hope. We got a two-party system, and there's only one party with any possibility. The party needs to be cleaned out and rebuilt with a new generation. And that can't happen fast enough. Now, of course, it's possible that nothing will work. That's inevitable that American democracy will fall under the bus and human rights will collapse, etc., perhaps. Or perhaps part of the problem is that Trump truly represents something in America beyond politics that we have a hard time putting our head around. And that is the sort of egocentric selfie culture that we have created, where the young aspire to be influencers. Now, what's an influencer? They don't make money, they don't provide a service. They just are, and they influence. Young people drawn into playtime acting, phony, greedy, pathetically desperate for fame and meaning. Now, that's a very big topic, and I'm not trying to address that, but I'm just saying it's possible that that Trump really does represent that. He's the influencer in chief. Remember, he's a crappy businessman. He was bankrupt 4 times, and his father bailed him out. It's all about appearance and presentation and BS. But think about Trump as influencer in chief, and it sends chills down your spine. Or maybe the pendulum will swing back. You know, Democrats will win back Congress, and the Trump nightmare will fade, perhaps. But so far, each swing of that pendulum has ended up further and further and further to the right. So inequality keeps growing, guns keep proliferating, schools and hospitals fall apart, Los Angeles burning to the ground. The pendulum is maybe swung so far already. You know, when the U.S. Constitution was being hammered out in Philadelphia 240 years ago, a citizen came up to Ben Franklin and say, "Well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of a government will we have?" And he famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Now, I'd like to end on a more optimistic note. I feel compelled to honor James Baldwin's point about facing reality. And the best I can say is I still don't know where all this is heading. And all I know is that the answer to Benjamin Franklin is still up in the air. And here it is, January 2025, the eve of Trump's inauguration. Time is running out. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And I'm happy to keep jabbering. Gregory?
Hello? Yes, well, Jeff, thank you so much for that enlightening and disturbing at the same time analysis of so many things that we're all thinking about and facing. And I am sure there are people here in the audience, both in the digital audience and the physical audience here, who have some comments and questions that they'd like to address. So I'm going to open it up to people. I don't know if there's anyone here who wants to say something. Yes, Bob, go ahead.
Hello, Jeff. It's been a long time since I was at your place in Whitefield, Maine, and here I am in Mexico.
Wow. Hi.
I wanted to focus on somewhat of a solution strategy. It's often said that there's this middle group that sways back and forth in this so-called pendulum that should be the focus of efforts for a party to prevail, maybe 6 to 12% of the voting electorate. And one of the things that strikes me now is the selfishness that exists in the United States, including among members of the labor movement who you might organize and then who bail at a certain point or aren't really about we all the time. And Trump's moral bankruptcy and selfishness leads me to ask whether a class strategy without a moral strategy could be effective.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by the distinction, but to me, they go together. I mean, the essence of a genuine class struggle, as they used to say, is moral, and you even see it today. Trump voters. I look at these surveys of working class people who used to vote Democratic and now voted for Trump. And one of the themes in their response is when the reporter or the journalist says, well, Trump's not doing anything for you. What do you, why would you be for him? Well, they say, okay, give him another chance and all that. But there's something else. And you get a response that says, well, he's better for the country. Now, I can't tell you what people who respond to like that exactly have in mind, but they've got some notion of community and that there's a that they identify class, their working class, they identify class with something larger than themselves. And so, you started by saying this is, the swing voters and how do you get them? Well, I think that part of the answer is that you don't spend all your time trying to identify those specific people who you can nudge, back to the polls next time, and maybe nudge 51% of them in your favor. There's something, when you say morals, there's something that suggests there's something bigger than yourself. And unfortunately, what Trump brings to that is I mean, I can't even define it, but there is something in there that people react to that make them think that he's got he's got the country more in mind. Now, in my view, that is totally absurd. But he says something, and it contrasts with what the Democrats say that captures some people's imagination and sense of morality. And that is, if morality is that you think about something beyond your specific special interests, then he might have his finger on something. Right?
I'd like to just throw in a comment if I could. One thing that you mentioned, of course, a couple of times was that very apt quote by James Baldwin. And the thing that is facing us, but so many do not seem to want to face in any kind of cohesive way, are climate challenges and climate stresses. Despite seeing what's going on in Los Angeles, what's been going around on the world, droughts and so forth. And here in Mexico, they're predicting that we're going to have a very severe dry season again for a good 6 months. But what this does, all the climate stresses and our inability to deal with them because of the I guess the fossil fuel companies and the other major corporations is not going to go away. And nature doesn't give a damn about politics. And these things are more than likely going to get worse and worse. We've already gone past the 1.5 degree centigrade increase that everybody has been worried about. Not everybody, I should say. Many scientists have been worried about, and that is causing a lot of these things. So we did not hear in Harris's campaign, as an example, virtually anything that talked about climate change and how to deal with it. And of course, just like price increases, that's something that her economic advisors would say, shut up and don't talk about. And naturally, on the other side, you're not going to hear that as well. So again, perhaps there's something you'd like to address regarding that.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. We're not addressing it, and it's getting worse. We're already beyond the goals of the Paris Agreement, and scientists are talking about, well, we're not going to make 1.5, but if we make 1.7, that's better than 1.8. I think two things. One, big capital, big dollar is always going to be there. It always has been there. So if you say, well, they're too big and too powerful for us, then that's where the story ends. On the other hand, if you ask Harris, well, why didn't she talk about that? Now, I don't want to speak for her, but part of the problem is that by dismantling the notion that government can make things can change things and make things happen by getting rid of what we had in the New Deal and the beginnings of the Great Society. We have lost the sense that there is anything you can do about it. For example, what's the problem? What is the political problem here? Well, one is that you say to the guy, the woman who's making automobile or working in a fossil fuel dependent industry, and the polls show that people who work there, they understand these dangers, but if they say to them, well, okay, we're going to have a program that's really going to reduce the cause of global warming, really cut back on all this stuff that we're doing. First question is, well, okay, so I lose my job on Friday. What do I do on Monday? We have no answer for that. The answer we had in the free trade argument was, oh, you'll be taken care of. Somehow or other, yeah, the market will give you a better job. Well, that never happened. It turned out that a whole lot of people in industrial America who had a decent job, a union job, supporting a family or starting a family or whatever, got snookered. They were told, oh, we're going to open up to China and we're going to take the jobs. You're going to take the jobs on the top. And the Chinese, who are unskilled and stupid and all that stuff, they're going to take the jobs on the bottom. Well, it didn't turn out that way. And so we have no answer to that person who says, yeah, I think it's terrible, this global warming. I turn on the television, I see what's happening in Los Angeles. But you, Mr. high-floating Democrat now, or liberal or whatever, are saying to me, so we're going to change this and you're going to lose your job. You're going to sacrifice. Well, all right, who else? You're going to sacrifice. It's not Goldman Sachs is going to sacrifice. It's not Bank of America. And unless people care about the environment, are willing to address that question of economic chaos and what happens to people, and people don't like radical change. They want something they can keep their hands around. They want some stability in the world. And you tell me that if I lose my job in the plant on Friday, I'm going to get a job making windmills. If I lose a job in the auto plant on Friday, I'm going to get a job making windmills on Monday, and we're going to see to it that you have that job. Then, oh, okay, that's worth talking about. Now, who is going to propose that? Well, you can't do that. This is a free country. Well, okay, it's a free country. Capital does what it wants. Then you're not going to solve the environmental problem. You're not going to solve global warming. And this is Baldwin's point. First, you got to face it. Face that you're not going to solve it with little stuff. I'm a recycler. I buy organic food. But you're not going to solve this problem that way. And unless you're willing to say, okay, we need some strong public presence in this thing. We need some direction. We need direction, and we need to chip away at what we think is economic freedom for some people, maybe for all of us. Then we're not facing it, and therefore it's going to get hotter and hotter. And Los Angeles, at some point, is going to burn to the ground. I think the question of facing it is not easy. And it means not only those people not facing it, it means us facing it. and us facing what you really have to do. And if the answer to all to these to really getting at the problem is, oh well, we can't do that, America doesn't work like that, blah blah blah. Well, you're not going to solve it, and it's not going to be just Los Angeles that burns to the ground.
Okay, do we have someone else want to make a comment, or?
I'd like to. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you
Go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yep.
We
Yeah.
can hear.
I'd like to make. I'll try. If you can hear me decently, I'll try to make a few, but I'll try to keep it short.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. First of all, I think a number of people vote for Trump because the status quo isn't delivering for them, and they see Trump as a disruptive force. And I think that's doesn't matter which way they're going to disrupt it. They don't care which way the apples fall. They're going to upset the apple cart, right? That's a huge thing. And the system isn't delivering for them. Now, Trump, and why is the system not delivering for them? Because of the logic of capitalism. Very simple, that in order to be efficient, you've got to reduce your input and increase your output. So between 1982 and 2007, GDP in this country doubled from $7 trillion to $14 trillion. But median wage went down from from $46,000 to $34,000. Why? Because to be efficient, you offshore as much as you possibly can, because your workers here want 15, 20, 25, 30, a lot more they should indeed get with benefits. And yet you can employ people in China or Vietnam or so on for $2 or $3. So the logic of capitalism means eventually, in order to get greater efficiency, it's a race to the bottom. You reduce the cost of inputs as much as possible. And the reason that we were able to have an advantageous situation for many, many years in the United States and in the West in general is because we controlled the technology. That ain't so anymore for a variety of reasons. All right, so that's the structural background against which you're seeing the discontent. And notice the jobs that are exported are industrial production jobs. And when we think of the working classes, most of us, particularly of a certain age, think of people doing industrial production. But large numbers, as you know, of the working classes are now in the service industries. So what did Trump offer them? I live in West Palm Beach, and I live actually a stone's throw from Mar-a-Lago. I mean, the other side.
Throw a stone.
West Palm Beach. But anyhow, I'm surrounded here by people in the service industry, many of whom despise Trump, but voted for him. Why? Because he said he'd give tax breaks on tips. So you think of workers, and also think of workers, don't think of workers as being this white industrial working class. Think of workers being a whole mixture of all sorts of different races and so on. Hispanics and African, if you want to call them African Americans, but whatever, and so forth. So you've got a lot of that's what he offered them. Also, the other thing is that you understand, although the Hispanic population, you said, went 42% for Trump, they'll say it's because I stood in line for my bit and they aren't standing in line for their bit. But what's really at the bottom of that is these are the people that are taking up exactly the jobs that the now legal immigrants have. And they're competing with them for housing, and they're competing with them for jobs. And so not unreasonably, they want a wall at the border because they've got the status, and my status isn't directly affected by immigration. In fact, it's enhanced because, like you said, you've got somebody to cut the lawn if you want to. I cut my own lawn, but there's a lot of low wage labor, which contributes to the wealth that I have because I don't have to pay so much for many services. But if you're actually competing against those people for housing, and if you're competing for jobs, and you happen to be some of those low wage workers, the last thing you want is an influx of more of you, even though you may share their ethnicity. So we forget that. As for the United States being smart, 54% of the adult population have grade 6 or below reading levels. This is appalling. Many of the movers and shakers in the United States, Elon Musk being Canadian and obvious example, aren't educated in the United States. And because we've had a lot of wealth in the past, we've managed to get a lot of people to come in who are fairly educated.
May we come to a conclusion
Yeah,
and a
okay.
question for Jeff, because other people want to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll stop there. But anyhow, those are some of the main points.
Thank you.
Hello. This is Julie Durand. How is everybody? Am I heard? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I hear you.
How are you, Jeff?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. How about March? Give
Marge
her
is
my
doing
love.
fine.
It's just wonderful that the center is bringing people like you. And I just my comment about what is happening in the United States. I'm happy to be here, living in Mexico. I just got back from Atlanta, where I was going to relocate, and it was nauseating to see how society moves there, how greedy people are. And believe me, after spending all the money moving up there, I came back home, and I'm
Wow.
back in Mexico. I have a comment or question. You mentioned that there might be a green light somewhere in the future. But when you have the Supreme Court of Justice, the Congress, judges, et cetera, in place, and people that can run with the Trump campaign in 4 years, what is the hope? What is the expectation that the Democratic Party will ever win an election? That's my question.
Well, nobody knows the future. And I've been wrong about forecasts many times in the past, and I've stopped trying to guess at what's going to happen. All I can say is that for anyone who cares about the future, you do what you can. And as I say, the first thing you do is face some facts. And the previous speaker just pointed out that for many people, for the legal immigrant, especially the Hispanic American immigrant who gets those jobs at the bottom, that illegal immigration is an economic threat. The suburban, educated people in wherever, for them, listen, it's a benefit. Mow the lawn, fix your house. I mean, here in Washington D.C., almost all the construction labor is done by Latinos. Many of them are legal, many of them are not legal. And I can tell you the other problem for the Democrats is that their coalition of African Americans and Latino Americans gets split in many cases because of this. So in other words, the African Americans say, well, Jesus, we've been living here for 100 years, and it's, suddenly these people come in and undercut us on wages. So I'm just adding to the pessimism about the future. But all I can say, Julie, is pessimism, optimism. Who knows what's going to happen? We'll see, and you do your best, and at the end, history will decide what happens, not our forecasts. But it's great to hear your voice.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
One
the
moment,
one
Julie,
changes appear to be the older people. I don't see young people really caring. I mean, it's terrible, the individualism and what the new technology with this WhatsApp and whatnot is happening to the young population, I just lost hope. But thank you so much for your answer. Big hugs. Bye.
Hey,
Abrazos.
okay, there's a gentleman here who's been patiently waiting to make a comment or a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. My name is Brian McDougall. I'm from Canada, actually, so I'm a bit of an outsider commenting on this. But I think for a lot of people, the central question, I'm a historian. I recognize the importance of looking back to figure out where the hell we are. But I think for a lot of people right now, the central question is, what do we do to fight Trump? How do we oppose him? And I think there are a couple of things that I want to suggest and maybe get your comment on it. The first is that I think a lot of people are overestimating Trump's power in the current situation. There's a certain degree of catastrophism that you can encounter when you talk to people. I think it's important that we remember that the electorate was divided into three parts, not two. The biggest proportion of the American electorate did not vote. The second largest portion voted for Trump, and some of those votes were conditional. They're not blanket endorsements of everything Trump stands for. And then the third proportion, the third chunk, voted for the Democrats. So there is a lot of reason to believe that as Trump's internally contradictory and inconsistent platform and his coalition apply their politics in the US, that there will be a lot of opposition. We saw that last time around, and I think there's good reason to believe that there will be lots of opposition on the ground. So then that brings me to the question of the Democratic Party, because unlike you, I don't see the Democratic Party as in any way part of the solution. They have always been part of the problem. They are a mainstream capitalist party that does not act outside the interests of the capitalist class. And we see this really, if we're looking just at very recent history, we see that in 2020, when there was a massive uprising, according to the New York Times, the biggest uprising in American history, of opposition to the state, social movements, people in the streets, because of the police assassination of George Floyd. We know the role that the Democrats played in 2020 in demobilizing that movement because they saw it as a threat to their electoral interests. I don't think that focusing on the Democratic Party in the next couple of years is going to be part of the solution. I think it would be part of the problem. Instead, I think we have to look to the migrants who are going to organize and fight against what Trump is talking about doing. We have to look to the federal public servants who will fight what he's trying to do to the American state. We have to look to the students and others who've been centrally involved in the Palestinian solidarity movement. Surely, if there is a chance of fighting Trump successfully, it's not going to come from within the Democratic Party. It's going to come from the streets of America. Thanks.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, there's a lot of sense to that. I'd say as someone who tried to start a third party in the United States, I'm aware of how difficult it is and how entrenched the Democrats are, as are the Republicans. But I think there's two questions out there. One is, how do you get rid of Trump? Well, at the end of when Trump came to power in 2016, you could have made the same point that the speaker just made, and I don't think he's wrong. But you could have made the same point, and here's Trump again. So the groups and the grassroots groups who opposed Trump were not enough. And I'd say the wind is even, because of what's happened in the past, I'd say it's even harder to start up a grassroots movement. But you know, I just don't. I agree with what you're saying, but I think the reality is that that the way the system is set up, if you're not going to, you can only vie for power, real power, if you don't have the guns. And the other side has the guns. We don't have the guns. You can only vie for power politically. And I think you need more than just a series of disaffected groups to protest. It's got to be more organized and forceful than that. But okay.
Yes, and when Trump dies in office after choking on a hamburger, you have J.D. Vance. Anyway, there's another gentleman here who's been waiting patiently.
Hi, Jeff. Joe Belden. Good to see
Hi,
you.
Joe.
Hope you back in San Miguel at some point. As Greg was just saying, yeah, I think if we don't get back some rural votes, we're going to be stuck with J.D. Vance for the next 12 years. Sadly, Bill Clinton used to get half of the rural votes. Hillary, as Sarah, got less than 30%. The other question is, any thoughts on? A question would be how do Democrats get some rural support back? The other question would be, any thoughts on who Democrats should nominate in 4 years? How about Taylor Swift? I'm partly serious, but yeah, why not? It worked for them, but my ticket might be Evan Bashir of Kentucky and Senator Gallego from Arizona. Anyway, great to see you. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Joe. I would say very quickly, I think there's two questions on the table. One, can the Democrats come back? And I'd say, yeah, possible. And you can make a case for that. But two, and it was the issue raised by the previous speaker. So the Democrats come back. So what? We had the Democrats come back. I mean, we've had this experience. Trump's popularity at the end of his term was the lowest of any president on record. And so that was the opportunity. And something happened there. We blew it. So one question is, can the Democrats come back? But clearly that's not enough. They came back for the last 4 years, and now we have Trump again. The other question is, how do you solve the larger problems facing the society? And unless you start a conversation that gets to the level of those problems and solutions that get to the level of those problems, then yeah, Democrats may come back. We might elect Taylor Swift. So what?
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to make one comment. I mean, perhaps what one needs in this situation is kind of a rump party to take the progressives and those who are allied with them to call themselves the New Deal or something like that, and that what they're talking about are exactly these issues of not only climate change, as I mentioned earlier, but inflation, the pricing, housing, medical care, et cetera, all these things that the powers that be in the Democratic Party have quashed, as we saw very successfully and to their detriment in this last election. So perhaps within the party, that's what they need to have, is a kind of rump, if you will. But again, I don't know. I think, it's got to come from, as the gentleman said here too, from the streets and people organizing for major change and bringing up these issues. Otherwise, it's not going to change at all. And it's always going to be about money, money, money. And you've got the Musks and the Peter Thiels and all of these people who are pouring money into all kinds of retrograde policies and candidates. And you need the power of people to really fight money. Are there any, I don't know if there are any other questions, or perhaps we're finished for today.
Let me just respond to the two things you said.
Okay,
Uh, First, just a point about organizing. After in my life, whether it's a city election or a state election or a national election, when the left loses, it's always, well, we got to organize more. And that's obviously true. But one of the things, going back to Baldwin's admonition to face reality, is that the right has consistently in the last few years out-organized the left. There's a lot of romanticism about grassroots left organizing. But if you look at what's going on out there, it's the right wing that has done the organizing. And in my view, the right wing has done the organizing on the basis of ideas, bad ideas, but ideas. I think there's a romanticism that often the faculty lounge has about organizing in the street. Again, I think we got to face the reality that there's something wrong with our perception of that. The other thing is just a note on what you had said before, Gregory, that there is something on the table. It was called the Green New Deal. And there's a pretty, comprehensive set of ideas that brought together these social, economic, and environmental problems. It got squashed, as you say. But there's something still out there. And there's people who still believe in that there's a framework for teaching. The first thing you got to do is, you got to connect with the electorate, with the people. You got to have a conversation with them that makes it not their fault because Los Angeles is burning. And anyway, I was just saying, just want to point out that the Green New Deal was a good idea and still is.
I agree. And I agree about the romanticism, and that I had made myself a note that the right has, over the years, out-organized the left to a great extent. So agreeing it's about ideology and about ideas, and not making people feel guilty, and also getting rid of silo politics. But that's a whole other thing. All right. Well, Jeff, as always, thank you so much for all of these interesting ideas. And I know that everybody who has been listening will later on go home and think about these things and see what they can do. And it will percolate in our minds. So thank you for all these terrific comments and ideas. And we're always glad to see everybody here at the center, and we'll see you next time.